Hi, good morning, everyone. It is a Saturday, and we're recording our weekly briefing on the weekend for you. There was so much tariff news, so much market volatility this week, and we were just kind of trying to get everything together by the end of the week before we could record this. So uh, we've got Albert Marco, of course. I'm Tony Nash, and I'll be honest, there's a lot of crappy takes on tariffs out there, Albert. I mean, you and I are posting something that is somewhat reasonable, I think, but I don't really think there's a lot out there that people are posting based on experience, rational approaches. I mean, there's a lot of partisan stuff on both sides out there, but I don't think there are people who have experience in trade, international business, all this other stuff who are talking about that. Are you seeing much?
I mean, the wild takes from the Fed is cornered, that the bond market's going to blow up, to the dollar is going to lose its reserve currency status is just astoundingly stupid. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just whenever you get into these type of like situations where things get extreme, people just lose their minds. I mean, they struggle to comprehend what goes on and step back for a second and look at the logical the logical way of thinking of going about all this stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
let's what are we going to start with? The bond market, right? The bond
Yeah.
market has been absolutely just in turmoil, and a lot of initially it started off as Trump is losing and the Chinese are selling down and blah blah blah. Well, that's slowly being shown as being wrong
Yeah,
because
tell us about that. Hold on. I just want to frame that up for people who don't watch the bond market as closely as we do. So, bonds initially, when Trump came into office, bond yields fell. And then, as this trade discussion accelerated, even until last week, bonds have risen to levels probably they were a couple months ago or something, and they're starting to go a little bit higher. They've started to go a little bit higher. And so, um, people are freaking out saying there's political uncertainty and Trump is failing. All this is, it's unpredictable policy, all sorts of things. So, and they're also saying things like this was, it's an unintended consequence and these guys don't know what they're doing, all that stuff. So back to bond yields and kind of what Besant is trying to do. We've covered this before, but I just want to cover it again. There is a duration issue with bonds. When Yellen left, and stop me if I'm wrong here, because Albert, I know you understand this a lot better than I do, but when Yellen left, she left a lot of short duration bonds that have to be paid this year and next year. And Besant's biggest challenge has been rotating people out of those short duration bonds into longer bonds. And as far as I know, that's among probably the top three issues the US government has faced at the start of the Trump administration. Is that fair?
yeah, that's what everything boils down to, right?
Exactly.
I think it was just under $5 trillion that has to be dealt with and put into 10-year plus, maturities.
Right.
All everything you're seeing now, including the stock market crash, the bond market issues, and whatnot, this tariff issues are all intentional to give Basant cover to do what he has to do.
Right.
It's just a necessary evil. Now, when it comes to selling bonds and Trump is losing, well, the fact is that the Chinese, by mandate, don't aren't allowed to even have long maturities, right? And they're not the ones selling, and neither was the fabricated Japanese fund liquidating, blah blah blah. It's not the Europeans, so that only leaves three or four characters that
Hmm.
could be selling the bond market down. And why would you want to sell the bond market down? Well, you want the stock market to crater a bit, and you can't do what Basant wants to do with a hot economy. It's just not. Inflation would rip, right? And when I looked at what was needed to get done from what I was told, I made that $50 oil call in the
Yep.
50s, and people just laughed at me. They're like, oh, there's no way you're going to go to 190, whatever,
We
whatever.
were in the 70s at the time, right? If I remember.
Or in the mid 70s, like 74, 75. And I'm like,
Yep.
nope, it's going in the 50s. And the
Yep.
reason why is you start looking at how they manipulate CPI inflation, right? And oil is a big component of it. So, and then on top of that, when the Atlanta Fed comes out and says, well, oil in the 50s would give the Fed the 2% inflation target, I just started laughing. I'm like, oh, okay, we
Yep.
know where this is going.
So,
Um,
Albert, I want to ask you also, we saw things like copper fall this week. We saw things like, I remember on Monday, I think live cattle were limit down, all this stuff. My view on that is there are secondary inflationary impacts on those commodity markets.
mhm.
And I go out and I buy some ground beef or whatever at my local store. Whereas a few years ago it was $8, now it's like $14 for, whatever, however much ground beef. I mean, so these things, it's not just about oil, which was a amazing call. It's about other core commodity prices and the impact on consumers in the US, right? I mean, I
Yeah, of
feel like
course.
we're the only ones seeing the whole picture here.
Well, I mean, it's not that complicated. Trump ran on a point of inflation as a problem, and he has to fix it. So, of course, what would you do? You would take
Right,
oil down. You would take commodities down, right?
right.
In retaliation to that, the political and economic unease, you see gold rally,
Yeah,
high. I think it was like 3,200. It's crazy,
right.
right? They decided to take the dollar down as per policy. I mean, remember, the Treasury Secretary makes USD policy, so he can
Yeah.
go up and down as he wants. Um,
Sorry, I want to stop you there. We've been saying for a couple months now, when Trump left office in 2021,
mhm.
the Dixie was trading at 90.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was at 107, 108. And it was possible that it would rise. But we've been saying, look, it was 90 when Trump left office. So we don't really think the guy is going to be uncomfortable with a cheaper dollar, right? And so this has come to pass. When the dollar hit 102, or when the Dixie hit 102, people were panicking that there was a dollar collapse. I'm like, no, it hasn't even, like, it's just started, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, they want a lower dollar to jumpstart manufacturing and exports in the United States, right?
Right.
That's just the basic why they would want a lower dollar. The problem is, the lower it goes, the higher inflation goes at some point, right? Not right now, but later on.
Sure.
Commodities will rip because that's just the way that's the way they're
Sure.
correlated. Um, I like I said, 97. I thought that they'd go under 100 a little bit, probably like 99, 98. But 97, they did hit 98. I think 98.2, but they could even go to 97. But it's very short lived. I mean, the dollar is a tool of theirs to control inflation. So at some point,
Yeah.
in order to pay for these tariffs, Bassan himself said that the dollar was going to appreciate, you know, anywhere up to 5 to 7%.
Yeah. I think as you said, bonds are a big factor. Breaking inflation is a big factor, and you have to have some sort of market chaos to break inflation. And breaking stock valuations has been a big focus as well. And for the basics, for people who aren't in markets, you having stocks rip and having bonds rip at the same time typically can't happen. So you have to have stocks break so that you can have bonds rise, not yields, but bond values rise so that yields can fall, right? And so this is why we've believed you're going to see a hiccup in equity markets so they can break bond yields, long bond yields, so that Besson can get what he needs done in long bond markets. Now, let's move from that to the kind of trade negotiations. What do you believe is going to happen in these trade negotiations with regard to bonds? I want to be very explicit with people about this because you've mentioned this quickly before, but I want to go into some detail on it.
I personally think that the entire tariff move by Trump was intentional to set a negotiating point for foreign nations that hold U.S. debt to push them into bonds and longer maturities. That's what I think 90% of this is all about, basically.
And so the large holders of US bonds are largely East Asian countries, right? Like Japan, which he keeps mentioning in these discussions, right? And
Mhm.
so Japan, Korea, China, other places. So when we have the big press conference about Japan, because it's going to happen in the next week or two, right? So is part of that going to be kind of zero coupon bonds or something like that with Japan? Or like how do you believe that's something that's going to be quietly done, or do you believe that's going to be something that they're going to kind of shout?
Oh, that'll be quietly done. That's
Okay.
that's that's going to be quietly done. Now let's understand something. When a major nation like the United States and China and Japan and whatever European nation you want to talk about initiates these tariff wars. I mean,
Sure.
um, weeks ahead of time, there's delegations talking with each other behind the scenes. They don't just pop this up in CNN or Fox News and say, "Hey, we're going to do tariffs. Surprise, everybody." It
Right.
doesn't work like that. I know that the Chinese and the U.S. have been talking at high level delegations for almost 2 weeks now.
Yep.
Right? They're gonna come. They're gonna come to a deal. Now, what
Of
kind
course
of
they are.
deal that is, I have no idea. I'm not at the table, right? But they will have a deal in place. 6 or 7 Asian countries before China will have a deal in place,
Yep.
right? The Europeans, I don't know what's going on with them. They have their head in the sand like always, but at some point they'll have to come to the table. I mean, they're the biggest losers out of all this.
They are. And Europe, I believe European leaders still believe it's the 1990s or something. I mean, they believe that Europe holds some cards. They believe that Europe has some power, and they just don't. They're price takers in global diplomacy. They're not market makers at all.
No,
So,
their manufacturing sector has been absolutely decimated. I think you, me, and Tracy have been talking about Germany's problems for 2 years, 3 years,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Exactly. Okay. This morning, this is Saturday. So this morning there was an announcement about some tariff exclusions for electronics and other things. Can you quickly go into that and help us understand what that means?
Smartphones, smartwatches, chips, and so on and so forth.
Sounds like Tim Cook has been talking to Trump.
Well, it's not even so much that, right? Because, like, for them to rally the market instead of like allowing it to collapse, they need to use Mag 7 stock, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the fact of the matter. I mean, people do what they know works. No one really goes out on a limb and creates a whole new plan or strategy for whatever issue you want to talk about. They just take what worked in the past and reapply it. And they know Mag 7 works, and that's what they're going to do. On top of that, there's a lot of money in big tech. And there are a lot of donors on both
Yep.
sides, on the Trump administration side and the Democratic side. So they got a big voice, and why would you not push them?
So do you think by doing that, he's trying to kind of rotate manufacturing of kind of advanced technologies from China back to Korea, Japan, Taiwan,
Yeah,
Vietnam?
yeah. I mean, that's a normal progression. I mean, if you're the China, if you have a factory in China and you see that Vietnam got exclusion of the tariffs, why would you not move them? Why would you not move them out? Of
Right.
course they would, right? And the Chinese understand this, and obviously they're going to try to counter it. I mean, they have been against India for years, but unless they play ball and get some kind of deal cut, it's not looking very good for China in the long run. I mean, the Chinese are such the Chinese, they're such manipulators of currency and economics, and it's just not fair to the rest of the world. I mean, they're get subsidized oil and energy, right, for free, basically, making them competitive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be competitive.
Right.
And then they're sucking out manufacturing from the globe, basically,
Yep.
and it's become untenable.
Yep. So just for a little bit of perspective, if you're sitting in China looking eastward toward the US, you see what's called the first island chain. Okay. So that goes from Korea to Japan to Taiwan, down to Philippines. And so you're basically contained looking eastward because all these islands are US allies. So from a defense perspective, there are US bases on these islands. Now, if the electronic supply chain is rotating there, and if you include Vietnam in that, that first island chain becomes even more powerful from a Chinese perspective. And so if you're sitting in China and you're seeing this news this morning, you're a little more annoyed, right? Now, from what Albert, what you just mentioned about China, manipulating currency and so on and so forth. I've sat with those guys again. It's been a few years, but there has been such little pushback from the United States for so long that they're actually shocked that the US is annoyed by this. They know that they have these advantages, but when the US pushes back, they're actually shocked. And it's not, I don't necessarily believe it comes from arrogance. I believe it comes from, wait a minute, this has been the way forever. We've always done this because you wanted to enable us to come up into, a relatively rich country, and you never cared about democracy. You never cared about, all these other things. And so now you're talking about slave labor. If you go back a few years to that piece that was passed in the U.S., and now you're talking about trade fairness, and now you're talking about this. So this is something that Chinese leadership and think tankers and other stuff have really just woken up to over the last few years. The other thing I want to point out is with these trade policies, and people are so they just don't want to acknowledge what Trump did in his first administration. When he came out with the steel and aluminum tariffs in his first administration, initially they applied to everybody. They were targeting China, but they applied to everybody. And gradually they pulled back and pulled back and pulled back and pulled back. And then they only applied to China, right?
Mhm.
So if you look back to 2017, 18, we've seen this movie before. Like people are so stupid. They don't want to acknowledge that this guy has a pattern. I don't want to come across as a Trump apologist, and I don't think you do either, but this is not a mysterious playbook. And this stuff we've seen this before at least once.
Yeah, we've seen this many times across history. It's not nothing new. I mean, why would you not use tariffs to undermine your adversaries and have a little bit of protectionist policies for
Right.
your domestic audience? I don't understand why the Chinese are surprised because things in the United States have been going downhill. I mean, 70% of America has been in a recession for the past 5 years. You know,
Yeah.
it's just the way it is. It's like, what do you expect a country to do but take retaliatory actions?
Yeah, but the people who visit China are the people who've benefited that from that legacy policy, right? So everyone who's visiting China, whether they're factory owners or Wall Street people or whatever, consultants, they're benefiting from that policy. So they're telling China how great the policy is. And then all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, this isn't okay. And they're just like, wait a minute, this is new information. I never really understood this. Now, one thing I want to, say, and just going back to step zero on all this, we have to keep in mind all of this market destruction is happening simply because the Trump administration put on retaliatory tariffs like reciprocal tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and I know this isn't a perfect calculation, but in general terms, the administration is putting onto these countries what they levy on the US. So all this is doing is putting a mirror up to what other people are doing to the US. So that's creating destruction around the world. Again, I look at what's happened in markets, and we called 4850 on the S&P and other things. So, we knew that the world would react a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm shocked every time I look at these screechy tariff headlines. The only thing the administration has done is imposed the same trade rules that other people impose on us. That's all they've done, and that's caused all of this.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, people just get fanatic whenever Trump is involved in any kind of discussion,
Right.
and people tend to do extremes. They say 250 oil or $30,
$10 oil or whatever. Yeah,
right? And then same thing. It's like the dollar is losing reserve status. Come
right.
on.
Okay,
it's like
let's talk a little bit more intensely about China for a little while, and I want to kind of understand at least generally what the end game is. We've already talked about bonds and stuff, but so, I've seen videos over the past week of Chinese factories that are empty. They're not producing. People are already kind of going into self-preservation mode. And what we've said for a while is, hey, look, there's going to be a small period where tariffs are going to rise. And I know people who import containers who've had to pay 100% tariffs over the past week, and it's been terrible. But we've said short period of price transfer to the US, and then China will subsidize because they have to have people working. They have to.
yeah.
That's a centrally planned economy, right? So when we see these videos of factories that are empty, what that tells me is the powers that be in China are terrified, right? They have to put workers back to work. Otherwise, you have major domestic problems. Am I imposing my bias onto that, or what do you see there, Albert?
No, that's exactly what's happening. I mean, the Chinese again have to subsidize everything internally, whether it's oil or whether it's jobs on the mainland. Everything's subsidized. They have to have people working, just like you said. They're suffering. They're out there, frantically trying to find trade deals with the Europeans, with the South Americans. I mean, anywhere they could possibly find. But the fact of the matter is, it's incredibly hard to replace the United States, and they're finding that out real quick. The
Yep.
entire the entire bricks, the Belt and Road, Ponzi scheme is again being shown as what it is. It's
Yep.
just a Ponzi scheme that doesn't
And,
work.
yeah, and what's interesting to me is this EU deal that people have talked about is they're basically going to put very low tariffs on electric cars, on EVs going into Europe. Like, so that's going to kill the French, I mean, sorry, the German
And the
auto
French
industry.
and
And
the
there is
French.
a French auto industry, and I don't think the French are going to give that up willingly.
No, the French are shrewd businessmen. They're not going. They're
Right.
simply not going to sit there, let the Chinese stroll into the European Union and just dump cheap products, whether it be cars or anything else. I mean, they
Yeah.
have domestic production realities just like any other nation does. They can't. They
Right.
simply can't have this.
Yeah, and I don't understand why the Germans have become such kind of lazy dogs about, letting all their stuff go to China over the last 10 years or whatever. Is Germany really going to let its car industry be killed by Chinese EVs?
Well, their car industry is already butchered. I mean, Volkswagen's been trying to shut down all their factories inside of Germany for a while now. I mean, I don't know what's honestly left of the German auto industry. Right. To be quite honest, I just don't know what's left. I mean,
You mean there's like an end of life in, say, 5 years or something like that?
yeah,
I mean, of course, there's manufacturing there, but
it's not pretty. I don't know how long it's been, more than 5, 10 years that I've been talking about Germany. Things are on a downward spiral
yep,
ever since Merkel, cozied up to the Chinese. It's just
yep.
it's it's game over for China, for Germany, as it was 20 years ago. So they're gonna
Yep.
have to figure out what to do in the coming 20 years to have some sort of resurgence of their manufacturing sector.
Yeah. Their chemicals are gone. Their auto parts are largely gone. A lot of
Morocco
their, sorry.
Morocco took a lot of their auto industry. So did the United States. They
Yep.
moved factories into the United States and into Alabama and South Carolina.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So, going into the next week or so, are you looking for major announcements this week? Do you think they'll fast track something, or I kind of
Now,
think we're going to be in this limbo state for the next maybe a week or so, and then we'll start seeing things in a couple weeks.
yeah, I don't think anything drastic will happen this week. I mean, you might start hearing uh rumors of some Asian countries finally cutting a deal and whatnot, but major announcements probably won't be until sometime in May.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about an end game. We heard this kind of the social media campaign about Americans are going to be screwing tiny screws into Apple iPhones or whatever, as a possible end game for this. Like, first of all, I don't think that's the intention of the end game. Second of all, we published a piece a month or so ago about AI-driven factories being the opportunity here, and the U.S. can't miss out on that investment cycle. So, first, basic, do you think Americans are going to be putting putting screws into iPhones as an end game for this?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right. This is more about um, marginally getting the manufacturing sector up production wise, really more about stabilizing it and getting the service industry back on track. I mean, everything in the United States is not good right now, right? But the key is how to get inflation down and stabilize it.
Hmm.
And a lot of what we're seeing now is geared towards that, and
Yep.
it's going to be years. I mean, the policies that Basant and Trump are doing are the correct ones. They're just going to take time, and unfortunately, we're going to be stuck in this limbo of on this yo-yo effect of good market, bad market, good economy,
Yep.
bad economy, and
Yep.
every single person on every single media channel spitting out their 2 cents of extremists.
Oh
Me,
yeah.
you know,
Finance TV or whatever, and
oh boy.
podcasters and all that stuff. Everyone's going to be, breathlessly reporting, the daily ups and downs. And I think for the people who watch us, I think we've had a pretty consistent message of, yeah, there's going to be some near-term uncertainty, but it's not a reason to panic. I think we've always said valuations are likely to come down a bit. And so, that's kind of where we are. And do you think we've seen, in terms of equities, do you think we've seen the bottom, or do you think we could go back and test the bottoms?
I think we've seen the bottoms. I mean, it's pretty clear that they do not want this market to break down, past like that 4,800, 40, 4,850, whatever mark. I mean, obviously we're going to go up. We're going to be up Monday because of this announcement of excluding tech. But you know, it, this is a difficult market to trade, especially when it goes up and down so violently. The call options, or you can't make money on call options or puts because they're so expensive because of the vol.
Mhm.
So, um, I think we're just stuck here in limbo until something moves concerning China and the United States tariff war. Right? That most likely it'll get done before July 4th because, why would you want to go into July 4th with, problems when you can have a victory?
Right.
Liberation Day 2.0.
Yeah, let me ask you one final question about the end game, okay? Um, do you think in 6 months' time, do you think Xi Jinping is a winner or a loser of the U.S. trade war?
Um, we'll make it look like he's a winner to appease him. But overall, I think this whole thing has been a loser for Xi Jinping. And I mean, I think this is all weakening him, like death by a thousand cuts, right? But like I said, it's politics, so we got to make him look, give him an out to look like a winner for his people. We want to look like a winner to our people. But the fact of the matter, most likely that Xi is starting to bleed out slowly.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I don't think he will be in power at the end of his 5-year term. I've said that for a long time, and I think we'll try because he's a known factor. We know
Mm-hmm.
what his behaviors are. But I worry that the next person is more of a nationalist conservative, meaning very Chinese focused, and even more aggressive than Xi Jinping. So I think you're right. We have to make him look like a winner so that he stays in power because we've known him for, 13 years or whatever. But I think we need to prepare for his end game and try to figure out, which we have some ideas of who's next, but I believe that person is going to be more of a, Chinese communist fundamentalist than even Xi Jinping is. So,
Great.
yeah. All right. Hey, Albert, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. And for everybody watching, if you have questions, let us know. Put it in the comments. If there are other topics you want us to cover, let us know. For Cloak and Dagger subscribers, thank you very much. And you can always contact Albert and me for specific questions. And have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.